welcome to the Multiverse Infinitum podcast. I'm your host, The Fox, and I'm joined here today with,
Gareth Vaughn, man.
and we are going to talk about entertainment in general. But we have a list here of a few things. So if you're interested in going on the journey with us in our light level of research and lighthearted delves, then click the like button. And yeah, without further ado, here we go. First topic that we have here is predictive programming as it pertains to what we think perhaps could happen in the future. Where we started with this was survival games. So a lot of, Minecraft, right? One of the most popular games ever. And also just the prevalence of survival games in the past 15 years has given rise to a new mindset of returning to that primal idea of hunting, gathering, and getting our stuff together and, you know, having little resources and having to do with what we have.
All right.
And even narratively, right? Like games like The Last of Us.
Yeah, I think we were talking about like the effect of media on the social mind, and
Yeah.
like how that like really programs people over time. And I think we've seen a lot of those survival games come up, and we kind of have a survivalist culture, especially here in America. So I think like those games definitely program that inside of people, and I think even now, just thinking about it, I think a big part of that is actually probably that desire to kind of get back to like a simpler way of life where people were just surviving, and if only you could
Mhm.
just like build your house and be self-sufficient and have some land, and like that's like much more primal and instinctual for us.
Yeah, just over time.
Yeah.
I would have to agree with that. Also, would you say, um, because another thing that brought up this specific topic was we were talking about the evidence that was released not only by the US government, but what was found in Mexico, and how people have just been so conditioned with decades of alien movies and fiction and ideas that we see that and we're like, ah, it's whatever.
Yeah.
We don't really care about these confirmations.
Well, and I think the other part of that is that the documented search for life. There's a book you gave me, which was astrobiology, which was really great on that. It was the last 80 years, pretty much, of like the search, real search for extraterrestrial life, and how unabundant it has been. It's really a switch to like, can we find bacteria? It's not even searching for alien civilizations
Yeah.
anymore. Just any sign of life out there. And so I think between that and the idea of like how unshocked people are. And that might also tie into just how unshocked our general generation is of like, yeah, people are trying to like convince someone that there's aliens and, all this other stuff.
Terminators
Yeah.
and zombies and witches and
Yep.
there's a lot.
So maybe some people did believe that and they was just like they were like, whatever.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people have assumed it was pretty much a hoax though, which is definitely my take on the situation.
Mm,
Yeah.
very interesting. And you're not traditionally conspiratorial minded.
No, not at all.
So that's
Yeah.
interesting. That's another interesting observation. Sweet. Well, the next topic is something that is maybe we can get political with it, but we can stay just focused on the numbers of America's number one export, if you can include like outside goods and services, is entertainment, right? Like Kardashians, Hollywood, movies, big blockbusters, uh, I guess fashion to an extent, but just things that are show, things that are creative, they're new, they're maybe they say something, maybe they play it safe, but it's a piece of creativity. And we're seeing maybe a resurgence of that in India with Bollywood, and maybe that's their counter to America's export of the Hollywood myth, but you can't deny that for the past 100 years, Hollywood. Let's be conservative. For the past 60 years, Hollywood has had a grip on the cultural zeitgeist of the plan of how things go and really selling you on ideas that aren't necessarily reality.
Yeah, and I think in extreme cases like these, I think a lot of people just kind of stand back and wait to see what comes of it. and especially in like the circumstance where these aliens were being claimed to have been found, a lot of people are just like, okay, well, show us the proof, and then they are very secretive about it, and they're like, no, we just want to tell you that they're there. We
Mm-hmm.
don't want to contribute anything to the scientific community. The only thing they said was that they tested the DNA and they could say it was not human, but they didn't release any information about it
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. So there was no acknowledgement, and that's why it didn't go anywhere. And so a lot. I think maybe that had something to do with it too. Is that people were just like, well, let's see what happens. If it's real, someone will figure it out, and then
It's the slow drip, though.
yeah,
Hmm. Maybe that's how they get us.
maybe. I'm much more of the idea. Well, maybe not so much so anymore, but I'm much more of the idea that media, especially nowadays, especially in some place that has like a free country or a free most of the freedom of speech, that's kind of dwindling now, unfortunately. Um, is capable of producing media that really provokes new ideas and shares them with people. And so much more, less of the idea that, like, even though there are people trying to create fake stories, maybe the media does have to show a better baseline of fake stories too.
Mm.
And so people are like, can identify whether or not something seems like a movie or seems like real life.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know.
I think a lot of art comes from that blending of reality too.
Yeah.
Like as a big wrestling fan, I don't know, maybe I'm just projecting a little bit, but I love the twist that it is kind of like a Hollywood movie, but then there really are like things going on and like injuries and like backstage politics and like maybe performance enhancers and like the dirty side. But they're really the real life living superhero, the movie star that's jumping off the top rope and dropping the elbow. Like it's interesting the art that comes from blurring those lines, I think.
Yeah.
What else? It seemed like you had something else to say.
No.
So maybe we
Not.
could talk more about the cultural impact of cinema and maybe not even on our own culture, which is obvious at this
Oh
point,
yeah.
but
That's
maybe the westernization of our global projection around the world and what we sell as the American myth.
okay. Um, I think that it's a dramatically underappreciated export of America's, the cultural export of cinema, especially across the entire world. Hollywood is the global hub of producing movies, and
Hmm.
those movies get witnessed all over the world, especially,
Right.
even in India and China and even places like Britain that have like big channels like BBC still consume a large amount of American cinema, and through
Absolutely.
that we share maybe not necessarily like a big um, cultural influence, or maybe not a big political influence, or probably passively a big political influence because we're showing of democratic states, but also a big cultural influence on like the idea of how life should be lived. We see
Yeah.
these movie stars and we see kind of an idealized version of life, and
Hmm.
when you consume that enough and it gets shared around, that it becomes like a subconscious standard for like how things are done, and I think that has a tremendous impact on the cultural overall. And so the fact that that's
Absolutely.
an American export is, I think, something that will probably be analyzed historically later, and
Absolutely.
maybe doesn't have a very controllable, or like maybe that's not a very controllable phenomenon, at least hopefully coming from a nation that has freedom of speech. I think
Mhm.
if people really genuinely try to tamper with it in a way that, and we've seen this a few times throughout plays and cinema, when it's attempted to control it for a political gain or um, other mass propaganda methods, the heart and the passion of the cinema declines, and then the messages are not adjusted as well. And I think that's kind of what we're witnessing now, is that we have such a political standard for our cinema. Oh, jeez, I did not sleep very much last night, but we have such a standard for it that it decreases the freedom of creativity and the freedom to be the ability to express risky ideas, and that's what we really appreciate from watching movies, is movies that kind of push the boundaries of those. And so we're witnessing that decline of quality because we were also putting more restraints on it.
Hmm.
And I think that sustained decline of quality is inspired by the attempt to create political
Politicize?
control. Yeah,
Yeah. Politicize.
yeah.
Do you think also maybe the bigger the project is, the less risk that they can kind of afford to take? So when we're talking about these movies that are making these global numbers and that are making these global impacts, do you think that they can afford to take less risks because the scale is so high? And the political statements are maybe in the more independent film
Afford to? No, I think they absolutely could afford to. I think if
and
they
still make
made,
the billies.
oh yeah, I think if they accepted the high level of risk involved with it, um,
And a lot of people involved.
and a lot of people involved, maybe they wouldn't
Producers,
make as much money, but they
studios,
certainly have the ability to maintain that,
marketing.
uh, well, cinematic like integrity almost. Like the
Mm.
idea that we're trying to make movies not necessarily just to make the most box office
The biggest
profits
studios
or
do
the
though.
safest box office profits, but also to like present new ideas to people.
Right.
Yeah,
What if
and
those new
make genuinely compelling stories.
Do you think the audience also dictates the validity of those new ideas? Like if things fail at the box office, that's kind of the audience saying
Well, yeah, and I
we
think
don't
that's what
want to
we're witnessing with
participate.
the audience really being repressive in the sense that we don't want certain things challenged in our art anymore. Um, and it's kind of a lowest common denominator. Are you familiar with like the lowest common denominator
Yeah,
idea?
but you could still explain
Yeah,
it.
so the idea that like the thing that is appealing to the most people is probably also of the lowest quality.
Right.
Yeah. And
It's like milk, like everyone can digest it.
yeah,
But then you get to the steak and it's like fine and like you got to kind of be
exactly.
an animal.
But the simplest numbers are the most commonly divisible. Like every even number in existence is divisible by two, and one is divisible by literally everything. And so, like, the simpler the number, the more consumable the content, and that's the idea.
Hmm.
So that's the lowest common denominator. It's the
Right.
mathematical term. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think maybe things can start off like saying things and challenging the boundaries and then becoming so successful and
Oh, there's so
popular
many examples of that. So many. Yeah.
and then they have to like water it down and become a lowest common denominator.
But then where do you also? I think that one of the things that we're
Sorry, Marvel. I'm sorry.
at least one of the things that I'm witnessing is that um, anime is becoming increasingly popular,
Yep.
and I think we're going to see that as American studios start to become safer, or there's going to be other studios across the world that kind of learn from the American TV and learn how to do it themselves, and especially that mass propaganda. And since there's already a global audience of people willing to digest media and high quality media, as you start to see like I'm super into anime, so as I start to see like these Japanese animation studios coming up and producing really high quality cinema. Jesus.
You can just say movies.
Yeah, high quality movies or like TV shows, then I'm really compelled to watch them. I'm gobbling it up. It's different from what I've seen. It's produced in a really professional and like enthralling manner,
Yep.
and like I'm loving it. So I think we're gonna see
And
more
you
of
grew
that.
up in the American audience. So
Exactly.
maybe the Japanese are like that with our shit.
Yeah,
To some
probably.
level.
But I think because we as the people of, or we as the nation that created Hollywood and kind of got to the idea of movies first. We made it popular, but we're not necessarily like inherently the best at it. And so now that there's
Mm.
a global audience ready to consume movies and TVs of all kinds,
Yeah.
we're going to see more and more people in more and more countries making attempts to create movies.
Yep.
And they're already going to have witnessed, all the history of
And the
Hollywood.
mistakes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the mistakes, and there's going to be more technology
Trends.
created to fulfill that capitalist. And so it's going to be
Hmm.
other people are going to get really talented at that too.
Yeah, that's another reason why I bought up
And that's
Bollywood.
one of the reasons I think it's really important to create um, integral cinema because it's about creating good stories.
Make something that says
Yeah.
something. Is that why you love Quentin Tarantino?
I do like Quentin Tarantino.
Okay, well then we can move on from there. I was gonna bring up Bollywood, but you can connect the dots if you're smart enough. You can figure it out. All right. What about video games?
Oh, I think video games are one of the things that's super free right now. I think people are pretty much just doing whatever they want in video games,
Hmm.
and it's pretty awesome what you're seeing. I think is game engines. What I'm really excited about is like hopefully like uh, three-dimensional game engines, being developed in like things like Oculus. I think that that's
Right.
probably going to be like at least that's what I want to see.
Have you seen Ready Player One or read it or heard anything about it?
A little
I can
bit,
give you a
yeah.
quick synopsis about it. So basically, there's this guy, and he's like really into like he's from the '80s. That's when he was into all the nerdy stuff. But in like 2020 something, he made a VR world, and everybody loves it, and everybody's into it. Like even your grandma is like into it. It's called Oasis, and you can kind of be any avatar, any like character in there, and your status in the game is like more important than your status in real life. So
Oh
people will like
wow.
live in a
Okay.
trailer and like have like shitty like apartments and shit, but their characters all decked out in game, and they're like have like 200,000 hours on their character login. They're like, I've had this since I was 13, blah, blah, blah. And like, they'll just like super love the game way more than reality. And it's also based in Ohio, which is the new tech capital of the world.
That's interesting. I don't
But
think we'll see that kind of extreme with this kind of maybe over a really really
where's the
long.
restriction though?
Well, I think the
Because that's
restriction
the
is the actual income of reality, which is we need real
what
things.
if you're interacting with
That and
real
sex.
people online though?
That and sex.
What
Money
about
and
phone
sex.
sex?
It's not as good.
All right, I think we can put a pin in that. Do you have anything else to say about video games? Like as it relates to entertainment and like obviously as an exportation, because I really liked what you were saying about maybe America doing things and then other countries picking it up and doing it quote unquote better or just doing it in a different way. Because right now, what's one of the most popular, if not the most popular studio from software, and they make Elden Ring and Dark Souls and Bloodborne and all that shit, and their games are considered art and masterpiece and amazing. And then a lot of the American games that are coming out now are considered like even AAA that have millions of dollars. They're like, this is poor, this is unfinished, this is terrible, this is there's no love in it, like nobody cares. And we're kind of seeing that as a reflection overall in the product of a lot of things.
Really, I didn't know that. I'm not familiar with which game brands
And European studios
are
also
based in
kill
America.
it. CD Projekt Red, the guys that made Witcher and Cyberpunk 2077, they are Polish, I
Oh,
believe
really?
Polish.
I have no idea. I have no idea about the game
A
industry.
lot of gaming. Sony is all Japanese. Nintendo's Japanese. Microsoft's American, but it's kind of
What
like
about Bethesda? Is
it's
that
kind
owned
of
by Microsoft?
it is now, and that's in Maryland, and they are one of the great American game developers. But they've fallen out of favor in the past 15 years or 10 years. So that's a ever since Skyrim really. So that's another big thing of like America used to make all the dopest shit, and now it's like we're kind of a shadow of our former glory, and we're seeing the world take from our mistakes and make things that are better on top of our
Yeah,
glories.
I
It's a
think
weird image.
I think that's the trend, though. I don't know
So let's talk about Coliseums.
how we're gonna make better games.
I'll make better games.
I don't know. Coliseums, you want to talk about?
You can't beat
Let's talk
Tetris.
about
Once
Coliseums.
they made Tetris, wrap it up, because you're not gonna beat it. It's like chess. Like you made the game. Tetris is the video game. Every other video game is, sorry to say, ghetto. It's ghetto. It's overly. Go do
No,
something.
Pong was the first
Go
game.
touch grass. I understand it's the first game, but I'm saying once they made Tetris, once they got to that, that was the apex of gaming. Everything since then is just go touch grass. Like go do
You don't
something
like
in
Call of
real life.
Duty? I like Halo Wars.
Go to go sign up for the military.
Damn, I don't want to die. I want to
Well,
like sit and eat some
go
Cheetos for like
touch
an hour and a
grass.
half, man.
No, see that's the
You see, this is
mentality that's
weird
fucking us up.
because he actually plays video games, and I don't actually play very many video. I don't even have internet in my house, so like,
Tetris still stands.
all right,
Regardless, Coliseums,
fair enough.
sports events, football, basketball, hockey. It's the It's the circus. It's the festival. It's the illusion. It's the propping up before the collapse of the empire. We saw it in the Roman Empire. We saw it in the Byzantine Empire. The over decadence, the overindulgence, the confusion between genders and classes and ideologies and races and divisions and class
Hmm.
and it's just a common occurrence at the end of empires, which I think we can say the American Empire burned bright and burned fast, but is coming to either a great reformation or a great collision with reality.
I think you're right about that in a lot of ways. I think that I definitely don't associate it with like the same like divisions that you do, but like I think that's when you say like the over decadence. I think that's pretty much like kind of a capitalist driven idea,
Mm.
you know. I'm not saying that I'm necessarily
Anti-capitalist.
yeah, because I don't think giving a solution like a gross domestic income or anything like that would be necessarily effective or even like good for anyone for very long.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Socialism only works until we run out of money,
well,
somebody else's money,
there's
and
parts
then
of
it
it that are
sucks.
effective and there's parts of it that aren't, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like the idea that
It's
like
nuanced.
roads are kind of a socialist idea because everyone pitches in and everyone kind of owns them, you know, and so you get like a global or an infrastructure that everyone can use to
Mm-hmm.
make society work and make everybody's lives better, but you don't necessarily like I don't know, and so the lines on that get very blurry.
What do you think about the politics of the situation of like there's always these promises and these promises either on the right of how much they're going or we'll say from a conservative viewpoint how much they're going to lock down and there's not going to be all this change, we're going to bring it back how it used to be, and then usually on the left they'll say, well, here's all this change that's going to come and things are going to be radically different and things are going to be much better and don't worry, we're going to change a bunch. And both people don't do much change. Like they don't take it back to how it used to be and do it how they what they promised.
Well, it's
And
because it's a left versus right system, right? It's
mm-hmm,
because it's so long as you can defeat your opponent on on the important stuff, you're willing to make dramatic concessions on the other
right,
non-important stuff. So it becomes like kind of a shouting match on a lot of levels.
yeah,
You see that in like aggressive um, and influential political groups. You know, the same ones that have, well, I don't know. There's so much blame to be cast on both sides. I'm thinking, I don't know.
well, I think that we should dissect instead of picking people apart and especially individualizing people. We should say the bipartisan nature of our system is an unfair at best. All right, unfair at its
Yeah,
given its
for
best
sure, it's
argument,
certain. I
but
see it creating a lot of division on the like the ability to get with a singular party, and you know, it's kind of like people say compare America a lot to like Germany before its fall, and I see those trades a lot.
hmm,
Um,
hmm,
so like the idea that there's two political powers that rival in rivalry with one another, and between or because of that, you can it becomes an inherent division in the country. It becomes a red team blue team debate, and so you're either with the red team or you're with the blue team, and it becomes
there's no
less of an
nuance.
idea of a unified nation but besides over a divided nation. And when you have a people it's like the Lincoln thing, a
Abraham Lincoln.
house divided it cannot stand. And so when you
Mm-hmm.
have a divided house, so to say, it's highly subject to collapse in one term or another.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of cast on like Trump for being a lot like Hitler, but like I think that aspect of America being inherently unstable in a manner much, you know, it gives the ability to like maybe Trump did incite like a
I think that's grossly negligent to try to make that comparison.
but it's not just Trump that has the ability to create a large political sway very quickly in the country. We see him as an example of that happening really fast, which is also what happened in Germany, is an inherent division inside the government creating weaknesses that allowed a global and dramatic change that happened so quickly that it became the Nazi Party.
Mm.
Um, and
A
so,
radicalized version of a previous
yeah,
ideal.
exactly. And
Hmm.
so,
Yeah.
just because Trump kind of got
We've
close
heard
to that
Trumpism.
doesn't mean that it's not inherently just as it doesn't mean even if Trump's not president and we move past Trump as an idea, it doesn't mean someone else can't do it right away as well. We're
Mm.
still inherently unstable because of those reasons. It
Mm.
does even if you take Trump out of the situation.
So you
That's
think
just
he
what we're
revealed the
seeing.
instability in the system?
Yeah,
I see.
and just as like the idea of like,
Mm.
and maybe that's what you're saying, dramatic change. People would, yeah,
Reformation.
and also uh, a willingness amongst the people to actively get riled up against one another to the point of arms, and I think that's
Mm.
what's dangerous about the left versus right is you have people so against one another that they're getting to an almost violent state, and we're seeing that enhanced by media and things.
I would say a lot of times not almost.
Yeah,
Like look at
exactly. You're right.
Antifa and a lot of the riots that incited, and then the counter riots that incited from
But
those.
that's the problem is that it's division becoming violence within our own country.
Mhm.
Um,
Which other countries are looking and they're licking their fingers.
yeah, yeah.
They're like, we did it. The Russian bots on Twitter worked.
Because whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, you can't deny that a country at war with itself is weaker than a country unified by itself.
Absolutely. However, I feel like voting has fallen out of our hands. I mean, even as long ago as Mark Twain, he said if voting worked, they wouldn't let us do it. And I think that there is a lot of truth to that in our inherent party because why does everyone feel underrepresented? Why does everyone feel like the game is rigged? That seems like a really interesting proposition if the manner was the opposite. You know what I mean? Like, we don't necessarily have representative democracy in the way that it works on paper. Just like we don't really have freedom of speech the way that it works on paper. We don't, nothing the way that we have it in this country really is the way that it works on paper. And then people can scream anti-constitutional or whatever they want. But if you don't have the money, if you don't have the lawyers, if you don't have the connections, you're just buried.
It's true.
And that's part of the show. That's part of the puppetry. That's part of the division. But the only way out of that truly is self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency will liberate you from dominion of others. The more that you can rely on yourself, food, water, shelter, whatever else that you essentially need and truly like desire in life, the less that someone else will have power over you, including the bourgeoisie, including the ruling elites who want you in
That's true.
these small little cities working at these shitty jobs and basically indentured servitude only enough to get a little bit of food and a little bit of stuff, and then they say, well, yeah, well, all you need is the new PlayStation and some VR, and you can sit in your little box and we'll feed you some crickets and everything's fine. And then the guy's out there with a farm and horses and chickens and his wife and his family, and he's like, damn, I'm glad I didn't buy into the lie because his self-sufficiency liberated him from the dominion. I think that's what the Matrix is kind of about too, just a little bit, just a little bit.
Well, I think that's a great ending point, except I have to add something to it, which is that even though self sufficiency is the great ideal, we live in an imperfect reality. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, we are social organisms and we are social creatures. And so we achieve higher things through collaboration than we do through division. And
Absolutely.
whether or not we want to try to achieve collaboration through a source like capitalism and money and being motivated by money as a motivator for collaboration, or if we want to try to achieve collaboration by an idea like socialism or a combination of the two.
What about mercantilism, where we trade goods and services between each other
I, I
based on
think
what
that
we
would
need?
be more fair, but also would create, it's so much harder
Mm.
that you have such a loss of efficiency. It doesn't matter. It's going to drag everyone down. And so the great key to
Mm.
life and also excelling in the world and being more able to have free time to devote to anything, even if you want to watch movies or if you want to learn to play piano, um, I think is collaboration as well. And so
Yeah.
like self-sufficiency is a great ideal, but it also leaves you very open to but collaboration is also the path to a higher existence, I think.
Right, and
Even
the
just in the sense,
security of
yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
The
Well,
the security makes you like you can't think about philosophy if you're saying where's my next meal coming from.
exactly.
So like
Exactly,
kind of
yeah.
like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You move up the more that you're communal. So do you think that's like part of our social contract? And you think that people who are hyper intelligent become the elite of that and the bourgeoisie control us all and motivate us through the money that they all print?
I think we see a lot of balance between a lot of compromises where we've decided that money is a great motivator, but it also has the ability to give the bourgeoisie an unfair advantage and live proportionately,
In excess?
yeah, in excess, especially in comparison to the proletariat in this situation.
Hmm.
Not to make it sound so extreme, but definitely working towards the greater inequality. We see the middle class dividing,
Yeah.
and that's been was a
Disadvantage.
large narrative for a long time, and it became such a prevalent trend. People kind of stopped talking about it. They're
Right.
like, yeah, obviously the middle class is declining. We all know about it. It's not
It's
even on the news
terrible.
anymore. But yeah,
Because
but we see that more and more. And because we're in a capitalist system, we as a country for a very long time have decided to make money the great communicator, and for better or for worse, we are seeing the outcomes of that. I think that's a great narrative to have. How we're going to tame that
hmm,
and what to do about it.
very fascinating. Food for thought. And if you enjoyed that and you want to join us on the next pod, click the like button, subscribe, click the bell notification so you don't miss any of our uploads. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. Comment down below. What's your favorite entertainment media piece?
Peace.
Peace.
Peace.